This episode of the G and G Ham Radio podcast is brought to you by SWR Spray, perfect for your next POTA activation.
Welcome to Guy and Gus Ham Radio Gizmos. I'm Frank. This week, Gus bought a 2-ton transmitter at the Charlotte Hamfest. Then he tried to test it with a dummy load rated for half the power. What could possibly go wrong? Spoiler alert, everything. Fire extinguishers were involved, so was his very unhappy wife, Svetlana. But I'll let them explain, if that's possible. Here's Guy and Gus.
Hey everyone, I'm Guy Wire, and I'm here to share some great ham radio stories, answer your questions, and maybe, just maybe, keep my co-host out of trouble. Speaking of which, this is Gus, and welcome to Guy and Gus Ham Radio Gizmos, where we combine learning and laughing about amateur radio.
That's right, still here, unfortunately.
This week, we've got quite a show for you. Gus has a rather explosive story about his latest Hamfest purchase. Let's just say it involved a rental truck, transformer oil, and a very unhappy wife. We'll also share an incredible piece of World War II history about Norwegian resistance radio operators who helped sink German battleships. Ariel will answer your questions about dummy loads and power handling. And as always, we'll try to keep Gus from burning down his garage. Again. So, let's get started. So, Gus, how was that Hamfest you went to last week?
That was the Charlotte Hamfest down in North Carolina. Great show, lots of vendors, good tailgating area.
Find anything interesting?
Oh, the usual stuff. Picked up some vintage meters, a few tubes for the collection, but the real find was this beautiful Gates BC5P broadcast transmitter.
Wait, you bought a broadcast transmitter at a Hamfest?
Sure did. Guy had it on a trailer in the tailgate area. Said it came out of a radio station down in South Carolina that went off the air in the 80s. Tubes are all good. The thing's complete. Even has the original manual.
Gus, those things weigh like a ton. How did you even get it home?
2 tons, actually. Well, the 2 cabinets together. Had to rent a truck and get some help loading it. Worth every penny, though.
So what are you planning to do with a 5,000-watt broadcast transmitter?
Well, that's actually why I wanted to talk to you today. The project's coming along real well. Got it set up in the garage, ran new 3-phase power, built a nice solid bench. She's a beauty.
Have you fired it up yet?
That's the thing. You wouldn't happen to know where a fellow could find a good 10,000-watt dummy load, would you?
10,000 watts? Gus, wait. The Gates is only rated for 5 kilowatts. Why would you need a dummy load twice that size?
Well, let's just say my existing 3,000-watt unit had a little incident during the initial testing phase.
Gus, what kind of incident are we talking about here?
Nothing major, nothing major. Just a small miscalculation on power handling capacity.
Okay. Please tell me you stopped there.
Fine. So I get the Gates all warmed up, tubes are glowing nice and orange, everything's looking good. I connect my trusty Heathkit Cantenna. The 3,000-watt dummy load I've had since the 90s, filled with transformer oil, built like a tank. So I start bringing up the power. Key down, watch the meters. 1 kilowatt, looking good. 2 kilowatts, still good. 3 kilowatts, right at the limit, but the Cantenna's handled it before.
Oh no, tell me you shut it down.
Well, I figured if I'm going to test this Gates properly, I should see what she can really do. So I kept bringing it up. 4 kilowatts, and that's when I noticed the first wisps of smoke coming from the Cantenna.
Actual flames? Did you at least get the fire out?
Oh yeah, eventually. Fire extinguisher worked great. Of course, now I've got fire suppression foam and transformer oil all over the garage. Svetlana is less than pleased with the situation.
I can imagine. So the Gates transmitter, is it okay?
Oh, the Gates is fine. Built like a tank, those old broadcast rigs. Didn't even flinch. It's the Cantenna that's a total loss. Hence my need for a 10,000-watt replacement. Figure if I'm going to push 5 kilowatts through it, I should have a dummy load rated for at least double that. Proper safety margin.
That's actually reasonable thinking. In a terrifying Gus logic kind of way.
See, I'm learning.
Learning to buy bigger dummy loads. After you destroy the first one, doesn't really count as learning, Gus. You set your garage on fire.
Hey, I prefer to think of it as proof of concept testing. Small fire, very small, barely noticeable.
You said oil was spraying everywhere.
Well, sure, if you want to focus on the negative aspects of the test.
Okay, listeners, let this be a lesson. Always use a dummy load rated well above your transmitter's output power.
Where's the fun in that?
And maybe don't push vintage equipment to its absolute limits on the first test.
Fair point. So about that 10,000-watt dummy load?
The fun is in not being covered in burning transformer oil, Gus.
Yeah, baby steps, got it.
Try Bird Electronics. They make the 10,000H slug, rated for 10 kilowatts. You'll need their high-power watt meter to go with it. Speaking of things in the neighborhood, Gus, have you noticed any helicopters flying over your place lately? Flying kind of low?
Helicopters? Now that you mention it, yeah, I heard one yesterday afternoon and another one this morning. Seemed to be circling the area. Why?
I'm probably just being paranoid, but there's also been this unmarked white van cruising our neighborhood the last couple days. Has these odd antennas on the roof. Looked almost like radiation detection equipment or something. Keeps driving past really slowly.
Huh, that is weird. Maybe they're tracking down some interference.
Maybe. Or checking for illegal amplifiers or something.
Well, good thing my gates is perfectly legal. All 5,000 watts of pure FCC-compliant broadcast power.
Gus, you can't use a 5,000-watt broadcast transmitter on amateur bands.
Sure you can. Just have to keep it under 1,500 watts output.
Which you clearly weren't doing when you melted your dummy load.
That was just testing. Off the air. Completely legal.
Right. Well, anyway, probably nothing to worry about. Let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk about proper dummy load selection and why bigger is definitely better when it comes to power handling.
And I'll tell you about the reactor fuel I found on eBay.
The what?
Kidding, mostly.
This episode of the G and G Ham Radio Podcast is brought to you by SWR Spray. Are you tired of trimming, retrimming over and over to adjust your antenna's SWR? We have all been there. You get it perfect for the middle of the band, but then when you want to work FT8, the SWR is 5-to-1. But with SWR Spray, those days are behind you. Now just spray it on the antenna and we'll instantly give you a perfect 1-to-1 match on any band, any frequency. Developed by NASA for the Space Shuttle, SWR Spray takes any antenna, dipoles, verticals, random wire, barbed wire, rain gutters, or even a folding lawn chair and give you a perfect 1-to-1 SWR. SWR Spray. Ignore reality. Transmit anywhere. The only patented pending product that is guaranteed to reduce SWR or your money back. SWR Spray might be available at Sam's Club, DX Engineering, Wawa, Ham Radio Outlet, Costco, Gigaparts, Alibaba, or Amazon. Perfect for your next POTA activation.
Welcome back. Before we get to Ariel's Q&A segment, I want to share an incredible piece of ham radio history that not many people know about. During World War II, along Norway's frozen coastline, 16 secret radio stations became the eyes of the Allied navies. Norwegian resistance agents, many of them amateur radio operators before the war, lived in isolated hermit stations for up to 6 months at a time, tracking every movement of Germany's most feared battleships, the Tirpitz, Scharnhorst, and Bismarck, all monitored from windswept cliffs and hidden fjord positions. That's right, one agent, Dagfinn Ulrichsen, spent 6 months in a sheepfold north of Bergen. That's basically a shack where sheep shelter, without washing or changing clothes.
Wait, they lived out there for 6 months, in Norway, during winter, and I thought my garage smelled bad after the oil incident.
It gets better. When Ulrichsen finally returned to Britain in February 1942, King Haakon VII heard about his condition and asked to meet him exactly as he was, filthy and bedraggled. The king held his nose, then questioned him keenly about his work.
The king held his nose? That's amazing. He wanted to honor what this guy went through. That's That's brilliant. Hide right under their noses.
Exactly. These operators were transmitting naval intelligence that reached the British Admiralty within 2 hours of observing warship movements. Their reports helped sink all 3 of those major German battleships. One station, called IDA, was hidden under the floor of a road department office building in Alta. The clever part? They deliberately placed it in the same building as a German transmitter, so direction-finding equipment couldn't isolate their signal. Another station, Theta in Bergen, was run by student amateur radio operators. They reported when the Tirpitz entered Trondheim's Fjord in January 1942, which led to multiple British air raids on the ship. The Norwegian Coastal Watching Network tied down between 300,000 and 400,000 German troops throughout the war. Troops that couldn't be used elsewhere because the Germans were so worried about Allied intelligence from Norway.
All from ham radio operators sitting in shacks, freezing their tails off, copying down ship movements.
Exactly. Amateur radio skills, CW proficiency, antenna building, working weak signals through terrible conditions. Literally helped win the war. Just a bit. These guys were dealing with Gestapo patrols, not burning cantennas.
You know what? That makes my dummy load disaster seem pretty insignificant. Although I bet none of them had to explain to their wives why the garage was full of transformer oil.
All right, let's move on to Ariel's Q&A segment. Ariel, what questions do we have this week?
Hello, Guy and Gus. This week, we have 5 great questions about dummy loads and power handling. Let's jump right in. Question 1. What's the difference between a non-inductive resistor dummy load and an oil-filled dummy load? When would you use each type? The main difference is heat dissipation. Non-inductive resistor dummy loads use ceramic or metal resistors that radiate heat directly into the air. They're typically limited to lower power levels, usually under 300 watts continuous duty. Oil-filled dummy loads, like Gus's unfortunate cantenna, use transformer oil to absorb and distribute heat. This allows them to handle much higher power levels, 1,500 watts, 3,000 watts, even 10,000 watts or more for commercial units. Use air-cooled resistor loads for QRP and low-power testing. Use oil-filled loads for high-power amplifier testing and transmitter maintenance. And unlike Gus, make sure your load is rated for at least twice your transmitter's output power.
Hey, I learned that lesson the hard way.
Question 2. Can you use a light bulb as a dummy load? I've heard people talk about this. You can, but it's far from ideal. Incandescent light bulbs have roughly the right resistance when hot. A 100-watt bulb is close to 50 ohms. Some old-timers used to use them for quick transmitter tests. However, bulbs are highly reactive. Their resistance changes dramatically as they heat up. They also have terrible SWR characteristics above 10 megahertz. They're okay for very low-power quick tests, but you should never rely on a light bulb for actual dummy load work. For the cost of a proper 50-ohm dummy load, around $30 to $50 for a good 100-watt unit, there's no reason to use a light bulb anymore.
Good answer. What's question 3?
Question 3. What does SWR mean, and why does it matter with dummy loads? SWR stands for standing wave ratio. It measures how well your load matches your transmission line impedance, usually 50 ohms for amateur radio. A perfect match is 1-to-1 SWR. Higher SWR means some power is being reflected back toward your transmitter. A good dummy load should have 1.1 to 1 SWR or better across all amateur bands. Cheap dummy loads might be 1.5 to 1 or worse, which means you're not testing your transmitter under proper conditions. When you're troubleshooting transmitter problems or tuning an amplifier, you need a proper 50-ohm load. Otherwise, you're introducing variables that make diagnosis nearly impossible.
That's actually really clear. Thanks, Ariel.
Question 4. How long can you key down into a dummy load? Is there a time limit? It depends on the load's power rating and heat dissipation. The manufacturer usually specifies a duty cycle. For example, 300 watts for 10 minutes, then 30 minutes rest. Oil-filled loads can handle longer key-down periods because the oil distributes heat throughout the entire canister. Air-cooled resistor loads heat up faster and need more frequent cooling breaks. For tune-up and testing, keep key-down periods short, 10 to 30 seconds maximum. If you're doing extended testing like amplifier burn-in, make sure your load is specifically rated for continuous duty at your power level. And most importantly, if you see smoke, stop immediately. Don't be like Gus.
In my defense, I did stop, eventually.
After the oil started spraying, Gus.
Details.
And our final question, what's the best dummy load for someone just getting started in amateur radio? For a new ham, I'd recommend a simple 100-watt resistor-type dummy load from MFJ, Diamond, or similar manufacturers. They're affordable, usually $30 to $60, and perfect for testing handheld radios and mobile transceivers. Look for one with an SO239 connector. That's the standard PL259 coax fitting, and at least 100-watt capacity. That covers 99% of what new hams need for their first few years. If you get into high-power operating or amplifiers later, then invest in a proper oil-filled high-power load. But start simple. A basic 100-watt load is one of the best tools you can have in your ham shack.
Perfect. Thanks, Ariel. Great answers as always.
My pleasure, Guy. And Gus, next time, baby steps on the power, okay?
Yeah, I got it.
Before we wrap up today's show, here's a quick I Bet You Didn't Know segment. Did you know that the famous ham radio sign-off 73, meaning best regards, actually dates all the way back to 1857? It was part of the original Phillips code used by telegraph operators on landline circuits. 73 meant my compliments to you in that code, and when radio came along, early amateur operators adopted it. So when you send 73 at the end of a contact, you're using a tradition that's over 165 years old. And no, contrary to what some people think, it has nothing to do with the number of elements in some formula. It's just good old telegraph code that never went out of style. Well, that wraps up another episode of Guy and Gus Ham Radio Gizmos. Thanks for joining us today.
Finally, that's 15 minutes I'll never get back.
Gus, come on, lighten up.
Okay, where are my snickerdoodles?
If today's show taught you a few things, or at least put a smile on your face, please share it with a friend or an enemy. Play it at your next club meeting. Leave us a review. Subscribe if you haven't already. It helps us keep making the show. And more importantly, it might help cover Gus's legal fees when the Nuclear Regulatory Commission finally catches up with him.
Hey!
If you have questions for Ariel or stories about your own ham radio adventures, send them to the email address in the show notes. We'll see you next week.